man for all things on fracking, knows everything. Tom Wilber is the author of Under the Surface, Fracking Fortunes and the Fate of the Marcellus Shale, which is truly a marvelous book. I had you read a couple of chapters, and I want to encourage you to keep reading. It only gets better. At a certain point in the book, he quotes the commissioner in charge of the SGEIS review, that's the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, as saying, quote, "The industry has done a miserable job of preventing itself and the issues from the start. It has been minimizing the environmental consequences and overgeneralizing the economic gain. The environmental lobby, on the other hand, was, quote, guilty of hysteria that was vague and misleading. Nobody called them on it, and I think they were at risk of marginalizing themselves." This statement, I think, rings really true, that we have the two sides and we don't quite know what to think or believe. And if anyone can thread their way through both sides of this, it's Tom Wilber, who's been a journalist in the newspaper business for more than 20 years, including 17 years with the Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin, covering business, health, and environmental beats. He's reported on shale gas development in New York and Pennsylvania since 2008, and he was among the first reporters to provide daily coverage of events in Dimock, Pennsylvania. Is that how you pronounce it? Dimock?
Yes.
Which has since become iconic of the national controversy over fracking. For that reporting, he's won top honors and Best of Gannett Beat reporting in 2010, and he now tracks current events related to shale as development on his blog, Shale Gas Review, which I encourage you to look at, because we are at a time, as John Bowermaster left us last week, understanding a pivotal moment in terms of what is going to happen with fracking in New York State. So I give you Tom Wilber. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you everybody at BARD for inviting me out, and thank you for the folks who have come off campus to come and join us today. I want to talk a little bit about this question about environmentalism. What is environmentalism? What it means to be an environmentalist. And I'm going to give a brief overview of my take on that as an environmental journalist. And then I'm going to just do Fracking 101, might be review for a lot of people, and talk a little bit about how this story has unfolded and where it's brought us to now. So what is an environmentalist? I look at it as a journalist perspective. I'm an environmental journalist, wrote on many issues with the Press and Sun Bulletin for 17 years. Groundwater contamination. You know, a lot of times when I'm writing about these, I see there's this tension between economic development and conservation. And we're entering an age now, and that's a discussion we could spend an hour and a half on right there. I'm not going to get too sidetracked on it, but where there's this idea now, and perhaps with the next generation, that there doesn't have to be this tension between economic development and environmentalism. But in the old days, especially in the Industrial Revolution, there's no secret that there was a lot of environmental waste that has also brought us to the comforts that we have now. And specifically, a lot of us like the comforts that the extraction industry affords us, as long as we don't have to look too close from where it comes. And so I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about this idea of muckraking, activism, and advocacy journalism, okay? So we have them all kind of coming together. But where I come from is from a muckraker. That is a traditional term, and I'm going to go back to the days of Joseph Pulitzer, for whom the Pulitzer Prize is named after, still one of the most coveted journalistic prizes and highest honors that we have now. And to put this in context, Pulitzer was a publisher back post-Civil War into the turn of the 20th century and the Industrial Revolution, back when there was a time of great exploitation of resources, the Gilded Age, right? There was a great division of wealth. You had a lot of corporate interests that it was pre-union, pre-regulation. And so there was this need then, in his view, of letting in the air and light to these large corporations and institutional interests in government organizations as well. Raking them up, letting in the air and light, which is information, opening it up so everybody can see it. And that is quite an honorable journalistic tradition. Now, I will say that Pulitzer also advocated this idea of looking at suspicion at institutions or any concentration of wealth and power, both government and private. And again, this was pre-union. It was a time when there was a great class division, even more than what we have now. And to paraphrase what he was doing, it was comforting the afflicted, afflicting the comfortable, giving a voice to the voiceless. So is this advocacy journalism? Well, in some way, it's advocacy for the people's right to know and for opening up, shining the light, for watchdog journalism. But it's a little different from what we're getting into now with this idea of activism. And this brings us into this whole age now where we have the social network, right? So anybody can become a journalist. That, in many ways, is a good thing. So I'll just go over the good and bad, and then we'll get into the fracking part of it. In the old days, you had the paid journalists, the professional journalists working for the mainstream, the institution, the paper, the broadcast. And a bunch of editors would sit around every day and go through all the news and decide what's newsworthy and what's not newsworthy. And for the newspaper, that generally had to do with what people wanted to hear and what people needed to hear, and balancing those things. Okay, it was this idea of, there was a filter in the sense that there was also accountability. Because once the newspaper, if they printed an error, there would be called to task on it. There was letter to the editors. So the newspaper were these open forums, and the journalists and the editors were pretty much the moderators of the forum, with the idea that they were always eager, again, with a Pulitzer idea, to shine the light, and they were never afraid to attack government and big institutions. So now we have an era where everybody has a voice. Instead of writing a letter to the editor, you can tweet, you can have a blog, you have a Facebook page, and you have independent journalism. That's actually served the public well in many ways because it's opened up the access of people to have a voice. But in other ways, it's been difficult because there's not the same accountability that there used to be. There still is with the big institutions, but there's, not to say that independent journalists are not accountable, but they essentially don't operate with the same filter, so they might get fixated on one thing. The broad idea is this is put out in a marketplace of ideas, and in a truly free society, in this marketplace, people can come and choose their own information. So there's no wrong information, no right information, there's just information, and the more information there is in a broad marketplace of ideas, it's up to the public to choose the good from the bad, the right from the wrong. So I don't want to get too far afield on that. I do want to talk a little bit about the discussion, again, where I'm coming from. I'll go back and say, okay, so I'm a watchdog, I'm a muckraker. If you want to say I like to, my task or charter or belief is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, that's true. That's a liberal, by the way, a liberal idea, right? It's pre-Fox News, and that's where the media a lot of times gets this liberal label, the old media at least. And I thought it was unfortunate that a lot of the media would be afraid, like a lot of people were afraid of being called liberal for a while. It was the L word. Conservatives were never afraid to be conservatives, but sometimes for a while, liberals were afraid to be called liberal. But I think that if liberal is, through the media, this definition of the media is an agent for social change. So the Pulitzer idea was you can't have social change unless you have this idea of people knowing everything that's out there. So going to the fracking debate, people ask me all the time, what side are you on? Are you for or you're against? What do you think of fracking? Is it a good idea or a bad idea? And I really don't have a formal position on the merits versus the risks. although I can talk quite a bit about both of those things. But I do have an issue with transparency. And again, that's where I'm coming from. That's my definition of an environmental journalist, is somebody that wants to shed the light. So there's plenty of room for transparency in the extraction industry, in the oil and gas industry in particular, because there's very little of it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about all the exemptions, the hazardous waste exemptions, and all the other things that get in the way of the general public of seeing what this industry actually is. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about the pros and the cons, getting back to this idea that we like everything that the industry affords us as long as we don't have to look too closely at it. Well, this fracking debate now is making us look very closely at it. And when we look closely at natural gas, we also have to start talking about other fossil fuels. We've got to start talking about, well, what are we on right now? We're mostly fueled by coal, right? I mean, natural gas is starting to displace coal, but we've never had this big, lively discussion about the ills of coal or the ambient mercury pollution or the particulate matter or the mountaintop removal like we are in fracking. So I think it's all a very healthy discussion, and I'm really glad to see it hitting the mainstream. Let's just, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because a lot of people probably know a lot about shale gas development and fracking. But let's just see a show of hands. Do people know what high volume hydraulic fracturing is with horizontal drilling? How many are pretty well versed in that? Raise your hands right up so I can see. How many people would like me to go over that? Okay, I'll do it. First, I'm going to start showing you the footprint of some shale gas reserves. This is the Marcellus Shale, and it extends through Pennsylvania up through New York. The red places are the places where it's more viable because it's got more thickness. There's also other elements to it, thermal maturity, carbon content, the dryness of the carbon, all these other things, but the thickness is one of the key factors. So you can see the drilling fairway, that's the places where the drill operators are most likely to start, and they have started because that's the easy pickings. And from there they tend to build out.
Could I quickly ask you,
Yeah.
is it all on the west side of the Hudson? Or does some of it come?
It's on the west side of the Hudson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Here, we don't have the Hudson River here, but here's where you'll see this, the place in the line, the inner core there, is the place where it's most likely to build out most quickly. And I believe that's going to be on the west side of the Hudson. I don't think it really extends much. It might be a little bit, but it definitely, to the west of the Hudson, is one of the prime areas up through upstate New York. This is the Utica Shale. We don't hear as much about that. It's another shale play that underlies the Marcellus. And here's something very important about New York State, is the Utica Shale in some places in Pennsylvania is too deep. Okay, the Marcellus Shale in some places in northern New York is too shallow. But both the Utica and the Marcellus, right along the Pennsylvania border, are both very good depths and thicknesses to develop, and this is called the stacked horizons. You got one pay zone stacked on top of the other, and it increases your incentive to drill. So here's what's important up around the Catskill areas. We're still west of the Hudson here, but it's in the Catskills, is you have the Utica, the Marcellus. I don't know if you can see these very well, but in between there's a lot of other formations too. They're traditional formations. And traditional formations or conventional formations are more geographically limited. So I'm just going to go back a little bit to our map and show you what's very important here is that unlike, and this is one reason we haven't been talking about natural gas development before it was shale gas, the traditional or conventional formations are geographically limited, mostly out in western New York, so people can develop a certain area and the rest of the state really doesn't know about it. The shale gas formations, as you can see, cover a huge footprint, and that's why it's such national news, because these are, the Utica and the Marcellus are two of more than 24 shale basins throughout the country, and the United States is now on the the country to first develop this technology that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So they're about a decade ahead of other countries like China that are just starting to ramp up and develop shale gas. As a matter of fact, there's so much shale gas potentially in the United States that the United States is talking about exporting its shale gas supplies. Now, we haven't heard that the United States is an energy exporter for some time. So that's a huge economic incentive. High volume hydraulic fracturing, I'll make the distinction between conventional. It's called unconventional because it uses unconventional means for these sources, that these mantles of shale gas that for a long time were inaccessible. By inaccessible, I mean there was no way to get the gas out of them. People knew, that the companies knew there was a lot of gas in them, but it's bedrock. So it's not like a porous conventional formation where you stick a straw down and just suck it out. You have to fracture apart the bedrock. So the way they do that is they drill down vertically, just like the conventional formation. And now they have this technology where they can steer that well bore horizontally through the bedrock, because the bedrock's only 30, 40 feet thick, okay, unlike a conventional formation that's a lot deeper. So they do this with one well. They drill, it's called a lateral when they drill out horizontally. They drill out one lateral in one direction, one in another, one in another, and one in another, so it spiders out. Then they put down another well, and they do this uniformly across a grid. And the long and short of it is, conventional formations were isolated pockets, where shale gas formations are widespread. So to extract the gas from a shale gas play, you're going to have a lot more surface area over the long haul that is going to notice the impact. Now, surface area, I don't mean, I don't want to get too technical because you'll hear from the industry, they'll say this all the time. Because we drill horizontally, there's less disruption to the surface. And they like to say that, but what they don't say is, well, you might have had, 300 or 400 wells in a given conventional formation because it was isolated. A shale gas covers such a big area in New York State, you're going to have 60,000, 70,000 wells across the state. So the impact, the long-term impact of this is very important. Fracking has been around prior to the unconventional development. It was used for certain conventional formations, but it was used maybe 300, 400,000 gallons max. And for a shale gas well, they use 5, 6 million gallons. So the amount of water that it uses and the, I guess I'll back up a little bit, just the water is mixed with a proprietary chemical solution. And here's where the big issue comes in about putting chemicals in the ground. What are the chemicals? What do they do to the groundwater table? And where do they go? So, well, that's been happening for a long time. But now we're talking about several orders of magnitude larger over the next 2 or 3 or 4 decades. So it's big time. And this whole idea of what the chemicals are, what type of waste they do, and what we do with this waste is a big deal. And I'm going to get into that in a minute here. First, though, I want to go back to a time before fracking was a bad word. And there was a time. Fracking actually is an industry word. It's short for hydraulic fracturing. And this is when, in 2008, and it was right about the time in the Press and Sun Bulletin where I worked as a journalist, daily journalist, we're starting to get, the natural gas story was becoming bigger. It was always part of my environmental beat with the conventional formations, but it just wasn't that big a story because it was happening in geographically limited places off and on. But the price of natural gas was going up, and we were hearing that there were more farmers were being approached by landmen. And in the past, prospectors would lease mineral rights to upstate New York land, $10 an acre, $15 an acre, $5 an acre. And a lot of this was highly speculative because, well, there might be natural gas, they might not, but if they can lock up a lot of land cheap, then, it's worth the long-term risk that someday they might be able to find something under that. So we started hearing that landmen were knocking on a lot of doors where they had never knocked before and were offering a lot more money, $300 an acre, $400 an acre. And then in the summer of 2008, a group of farmers in Deposit, New York, that's in Eastern Broome County, west in Sanford and Delaware, western Delaware County. They got together and they negotiated collectively. It's called a coalition. They had 50,000 acres. There's about 500 farmers. And they negotiated the mineral rights for their land with XTO Energy, which later was bought by ExxonMobil for $110 million. So this got everybody's attention right away, because this was unheard of sums of money that was now on the table. And everybody said, holy cow, what is under Broome County in Delaware County? And how is this different from conventional? Now, I just gave you a little scenario, but nobody knew about this. They didn't know what the Marcellus was. They didn't really know about shale gas. So when this happened, it brought a lot of questions. And again, this was before fracking was a bad word. So you had two things going on. You had one is, holy cow, we're sitting on a wealth of natural gas. This is good because A, landowners can get a lot of money. B, it could stimulate economics, with drilling companies. And C, what's not to like about clean burning natural gas, okay? People didn't really understand all the ins and outs of it. So there was no fracking movement back then. It was before Josh Fox, 2 years before Josh Fox released the movie Gasland. But what's really critical for me here as a journalist is the grassroots movement that eventually turned into a full-fledged national environmental movement started with town hall meetings with municipal leaders just asking questions. So the planners, the public safety people, the road planners, the town supervisors, once they got word of the $110 million deal, they realized that the landmen would be coming to their town next. What would this look like? So they started asking the Department of Environmental Conservation about that. And I think the people that have read the second chapter here might have already read the part that I'm going to read, but it's such an important part about how this developed that I'm going to read it again. Okay, so the DEC toured around with the Farm Bureau and others in these forums to try to, informational meetings they call them. And there was one in particular. And they had a panel of the Farm Bureau, somebody from the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, and Linda Collert from the Division of Mineral Resources of the DEC. They sat in front of several hundred residents, suburbanites, farmers, and officials from the town, county, and state governments who packed the public hall beyond capacity. The meeting was also streamed online. Collert ran through a PowerPoint presentation of how Marcellus development would proceed using information and photographs from conventional plays in upstate New York. She paused on a slide of lush meadow of wildflowers and grasses with a bank of trees in the background. There was a reclaimed natural gas site. This was a reclaimed natural gas site, she said, and an example of the expected long-term impact from Marcellus development. I recognized the slide from a DEC display 2 years earlier when I was covering public hearings on a proposal by the Office of Mineral Resources to lease the mineral rights of state forests in the southern tier in central New York. Marcellus prospecting had yet to become a public phenomenon, and there had been no mention of shale gas at those meetings. Nonetheless, prospects of any kind of drilling on state lands drew fierce opposition from outdoor enthusiasts, ranging from hunters to hikers. At these hearings, Jack Dahl, director of DEC Bureau of Oil and Gas Regulation, set up a display with his colleagues pitching clean, well-organized drill sites, including before and after landscape depictions. This display had included the photograph that Collert now showed, and Dahl had given similar assessment that the impact from gas development due to the, quote, well-established regulatory program and, quote, rigorous permitting process of the agency would be minimal or even environmentally beneficial over the long term. The crowd at the Shenango Town Hall was skeptical. People fired questions at the panel before Collert's presentation was over. A person in back stood up and asked how local emergency responders could prepare for a spill, fire, or explosion when the industry did not fully disclose the complete chemical content and concentrations of fracking fluids. Collard looked at other members of the panelists to see if anybody might want to take a crack at that one. They looked back at her expectantly. We don't anticipate any significant emergencies, she said after a pause. These things are rare. Another person stood up and asked how regulators were preparing for an influx of drilling that would exceed any historical comparison. Collard responded, "We've been doing fine so far, no problem." She returned to her PowerPoint and was interrupted again by a person who noted that incentives for roadside dumping would go up as waste increased faster than the options for treatment. How would the agency handle that? You have landowners out there. You have neighbors out there. We would hear about it, Collard said. Hopefully the operators will be responsible. More questioning along the same lines followed her presentation, and she delivered the same answers. Flowback is classified as an industrial waste and therefore requires a permit for transport, she said again, and again came a question, where does it go? I can't answer that, she said. It's all regulated. So this was covered in the newspaper. This was streamed online, and the town, and it was also attended by not only town officials, but there were state legislators there as well that were representing the area. And these answers simply did not satisfy the people that wanted to know. So this got back to the governor's office, and the following day they were to have another meeting up in Greene, which is just north of there. And I got a call from the governor's office saying, well, wait a minute, we've changed the agenda. Rather than sending just Linda Collard, who was a staffer on the mineral resources, we're going to send some higher ups. And that was Judith Enck, who was a direct report to the governor, and Stu Gruskin, who is the assistant commissioner, who Susan quoted earlier, to answer some of these questions. So they came out, and this is an auditorium of the local school. It's a small school, but the auditorium probably fit 400 or 500 people. And it's in a very rural community, and it was packed. It was standing room only. And it was the same type of environment where the audience, and these are not activists, again, these are just townspeople that want to know how they're going to manage the shale gas rush, kept firing away at the DEC. But the difference was Judith Enck was, and by the way, well, I'll tell you her response, and then I'll tell you her background. She had a much different take on it. She said, you know, these are really good questions you're answering. We need to get to the answer. We need to get the answer to these questions. We're going to take a look at this, and I'll take this back to the governor. And again, she was the direct report. She was the governor's advisor on environmental things. Now, Judith Enck, unlike Linda Collard, was not a rank and file staffer with the Mineral Resources Division. She came on board with Spitzer. She was appointed by Spitzer because she came from an environmental activist background. She worked with NYPIRG for a long time. And then when Spitzer took her on, she was an activist for, when he was Attorney General, okay, and he was against the dirty coal plants. So she brought him on. When he became governor, she became his advisor. He obviously resigned after the sex scandal. And then Patterson was governor, and she stayed on. But the important thing is that she came up through the environmental ranks, and she had a much different take on it. So when you're looking at the big institutional part of it, you remember it's not one person that's necessarily pulling the trigger into something the size of the DEC. There's a lot of back and forth, and sometimes one hand isn't talking to the other. But I think what's really important is she was the one that brought this back. And this Patterson, by the way, was a governor very unlike Cuomo. Okay, he was a delegator. So it was up to his staff to bring this whole idea of a moratorium that we have on now, which is the environmental review. That's the genesis of it. That moratorium came before the big mainstream activist movement really took hold. And what happened was, because they had a moratorium on permitting, Josh Fox's movie came out, and then it really gave the activists a chance to get a foothold with their concerns in New York State. And it's become more or less now a national showcase for the movement, because New York State is one of, I think, the only state with a huge shale gas reserves underneath it that is not moving ahead with permitting at this time. So this is just represents the idea that people originally liked it. Townspeople asked questions. Here's the slide, by the way, that Linda Collart originally showed. This is a Trenton Black River well conventional formation, but she showed as representative of shale gas. All right, so no problem. We've been doing this forever. That, by the way, I think is again, my part is being the muckraker. So when the big institution says, no, don't worry about it, we're good, we can't answer the questions, but everything will be fine, it raises a lot of questions. Now, meanwhile, Pennsylvania is issuing permits, and Pennsylvania is right across the border from the southern tier of New York, and they started drilling right across the border. And everybody to help, they have the moratorium now, 2008 in New York, but they want to see what's going on in Pennsylvania, so everybody's watching. And again, people had very high expectations in Dimock, Pennsylvania in particular. There's a lot of people who leased their land. They leased their land on the cheap. They didn't get the $110 million that the deposit people did because they leased it prior to that. But they were hoping that they would get a return with royalties. So they had expectations. And I'm just going to take a minute to find this.
Is the royalty based on what's sold?
Oh, the royalty is based on your contract beforehand. But yes, it is. It's 12.5% of whatever's produced from the well. That's the minimum. Some people go higher than that. If they're savvy enough, they can negotiate a 20% royalty. But it's a percentage of the product, the sale that comes from the well. Okay, so we have a group of people that become central to the book. And this is told, by the way, in a narrative. So it unfolds through the perspective of various stakeholders. And this is what it looked like in Dimock. From the laundry line in her side yard, Pat Fernelli had a sweeping view of a scene that would determine her future. Men and equipment had moved from the hill across from Burdick Creek Hollow to a fallow pasture directly below her house. In late September 2008, bulldozers cut through a field ablaze in goldenrod to level a pad for Guestford 3. The well would draw gas from under the adjoining Farnelli land, and the family's mortgage depended on corresponding royalties. The derrick went up in early October, and soon the platform straddling the hole was busy with men in coveralls and hard hats who were lifting, swinging, and lowering pipes with hydraulics and heavy hardware hanging from chains. Shouts of men over machinery and generators carried up the valley, sometimes with the smell of heavy machinery and diesel exhaust. As work progressed, it was easy for Pat to believe destiny was working in her favor. At schools, churches, and the Lockhart lunch counter and gas mart, the news of the landmen and their promises was giving way to the excitement of wells producing millions of cubic feet per day from the Teal and Ely properties. There was also news of corresponding royalties. Crews were now busy building compressor stations and pipelines on the Teal land, so at fair compensation, she had heard, and drilling 2 other wells along Carter Road. This is what Cabot's $600 million in shale gas development looked like. The size and intensity of the operation, its manic focus and energy were all directed at producing wealth, and Pat took comfort in knowing her 20 acres were locked into the equation. Even a drop of that wealth, $3,000 or $4,000 per month, would make things good for them. They could pay their mortgage, buy horses and other animals, and make a go at farming. Her older daughter was getting married that spring, and they would have enough for a nice wedding. Pat would no longer have to worry about making ends meet for 6 dependent children with Social Security, food stamps, and the lousy hours and low pay Martin was getting at the Flying J. Martin's her husband, who worked as a cook at the local diner. The shouts from men over the drone of diesel motors and generators on October 8th, 2008, a bright Wednesday morning, didn't sound peculiar to Pat. The crew had drilled to 2,000 feet, and still several thousand feet above the Marcellus pay zone, when they encountered a problem that brought the multi-million-dollar operation to an inglorious stop. Debris from upper layers had fallen into the hole and jammed the drill. The Devonian bedrock under Guestford 3 is covered by 400 feet of glacial till, unconsolidated stone and gravel known in the industry as overburden. Drilling through the till is like trying to bore through a gravel pile, and although there are techniques to deal with it, they are not foolproof. A drill that jammed somewhere in the overburden might have been less of a problem, but the Guestford crews had already worked through the till and were well into a gas-bearing zone of bedrock above the Marcellus. Gas had begun flowing, and the crews, left with an open, uncased hole, had no way to control it. The problems persisted throughout the fall. To Pat, it looked pretty much the same from day to day, with a round-the-clock procession of equipment and men. The yelling at the site might have been laced with a little more profanity than usual, she recollected in hindsight. But really, there was no way of knowing, for her to know, that the problem would soon amount to more than a lost piece of hardware. DEP inspectors were also ignorant of complications at Guestford 3 until an event on New Year's Day, 2009, put them on notice. A blast echoed through the hills. A mile north of the Guestford well, concrete that billowed from the ground and hung in the frigid air over the remains of Norma Fiorentino's well. Norma was having supper with her daughter at her daughter Brenda's home with her daughter, grandchildren, and a great-grandchild. She was feeling optimistic that this year would be better than the last. Brenda's chemo treatments were keeping the cancer in check, and her granddaughter was expecting a second child. With luck, she could buy some nice baby things with royalty payments. Now, upon her return home, she stood trying to fathom the gaping hole and shattered remains of a massive concrete slab that once covered her water well. A random act of violence? Who would want to blow up her water well? She called 911. As the Springfield Volunteer Fire Department cordoned off Norma's yard with bright yellow caution tape, cabinet representatives arrived on the scene. They took some tests around her house and determined that any gas, if it was there, was not lingering. So,
Coming up through the ground here,
yes, and I'm going to explain this in a minute.
do these kinds of wells have blowouts that are uncontainable?
Right, and I will. There are a lot of questions like that, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But I'm going to explain your question about methane migration first. But I want to go back to the context of what this meant in the overall gas rush. That, by the way, is the concrete slab, and that is Norma Fiorentino and her well. And this was the first time that people in New York State, and a lot of the people that were optimistic about shale gas development in Pennsylvania, started to realize, and again, this was before Josh Fox's movie, so they started to realize, like, well, these things happen, and it raised even more questions about how often do they happen. And the industry would characterize this as something, well, we want to make sure everything's safe, we're taking this seriously, and it seldom ever happens. And I will get to your question about the methane migration and the blowouts in a minute, but from a social standpoint, I want to just convey the importance of this, but this is what the industry did not tell people. And I found this report, because that was one of my questions as a journalist, and other journalists were working on the same thing, is how often does this happen? Is this just a freak thing? Although Norma's well soon became famous, it was neither the first nor the worst case of methane migration related to gas drilling in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. Much of what officials knew about the dangers of methane migration they had learned years before from more costly instances. The Pennsylvania DEP, Bureau of Oil and Gas Management, had files on more than 50 other cases dating back from the beginning of 2004 to the times Norma's well exploded. All involved dangerous and sometimes fatal accumulations of gas migrating from new or abandoned wells into enclosed spaces. They had happened before the shale gas became big news, and they had gained relatively little public attention. In 2004, DEP records documented the collection of gas in the basement of the Harper residence near several wells being drilled by Snyder Brothers in Jefferson County, almost 80 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. On March 5th, the furnace kicked on and an explosion leveled the house and killed Charles Harper, his wife Dorothy, and their grandson Bailey. A report by the Pittsburgh Geological Society includes a photograph of the scene, a foundation covered by charred rubble, and the shells of burnt-out automobiles in the driveway. And this is a quote from the report. Although it rarely makes headlines, damage or threats caused by methane migration is a common problem in western Pennsylvania, states the document. And in July 2008, an explosion killed a resident of Marion County who tried to light a candle in the bathroom. The DEP record of the event, one paragraph long, states that the agency became aware, quote unquote, of the problem after the fatality, which it linked to gas migrating into the septic system from an old gas well with deteriorating casing. The DEP files also contain some cases noteworthy for what was unknown or at least undocumented. And here's a direct quote from one of the files. Unknown name, Armstrong County, Southwest Regional Office, 1999. House explosion, resulting in destruction of residents and one fatality. Investigation is not well documented. Origin/mechanism of migration is an operating gas well, pressurization of casing. Status resolved. So here's something that, again, is shining the light. We're realizing, well, there is a documentation of this, but the DEP itself, the regulating agency itself, doesn't have good records on it. And this gets into bigger issues about, well, what type of regulations are controlling the industry? Now, methane migration, here's the report. There's it doesn't translate well in the PowerPoint, but from the Harper residence. Now, just brings us up. These happened before Josh Fox's movie. Now, Josh made the flaming water picture iconic. How many people have seen Gasland? Could you raise your hands, please? How many people have seen the snippet from Gasland where the tap water goes up? Probably almost everybody, right? So this has become iconic. The industry has criticized Fox by saying, well, you know, we could light our water on fire a long time ago. And here's the tricky thing about methane migration, and it might answer your question. The industry points to naturally occurring methane seeps or pockets as being problems unrelated to drilling, because there's something called biogenic methane. It occurs in landfills, it occurs in swamps, swamp gas. It's created by decaying organic material. And then there's thermogenic methane. That's the stuff down in the Devonian bedrock, created over hundreds of millions of years through heat and pressure. And it's all methane. And sometimes when they drill through the upper layers, the biogenic methane or methane that might be coming up from lower layers, it can agitate. So I think what's important here is the industry does what it says is correct. There are instances where people might drill a water well into an aquifer and go through some methane pockets, either probably biogenic methane, but it also could be a form of thermogenic methane, or they drill wells actually into some bedrock aquifers. And they can become volatile, okay? But I think what the industry does not tell you is that the more wells you put into the ground, the deeper they are, the higher pressures you're working with, the more likely you are to have this methane migration. So gas drilling, especially when you're drilling into high-pressured formations, exacerbates the problem. So I'm not going to go too far into where the Cabot case ended up, but in the long haul is the industry eventually tried to deny that it was even responsible for Norma Fiorentino's well, and eventually they even said that the DEP was just making this up, and there's this big controversy between John Hanger, who was then the head of the DEP, and Cabot.
What court is this heard in?
It hasn't been heard because it's been settled. Okay, but there's a lot of other cases. Okay, so this brings us to the people in Dimock in how this became a big story, at least, you know, in my view, it became a big story because I'm hearing about it all the time, and some of this is the echo chamber. But these folks who's never had their name in the newspaper outside of birth and marriage announcements became national figures. And Victoria Schweitzer called them, she's one of the people that signed a lease naively, was hoping for good things, and then wasn't upset about gas development. She was upset about the lack of transparency and the lack of answers. She called these folks that banded together in Dimock as accidental activists. They really weren't activists, but when they couldn't get answers, they all banded together and started asking about them. And there were people from different classes, different walks of life. Victoria and her husband, Jimmy, our school teachers. Victoria's retired. They put their entire savings into building a contemporary dream home. Carters are second-generation farmers, lived there for a while. Victoria is a widow, I'm sorry, Norma, a plumber's widow. She's a lifelong resident, and many others. So their story is told through the book. And then there's stories on the other side. I call them accidental activists as well. And these are people, we've been talking about all the problems of gas, right? We've been talking about methane migration, lack of transparency. But you can't discredit that we use natural gas. It serves a lot of good. It displaces coal. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's people on the other side of the argument, and they're not necessarily gas industry people. They're not public relations talking heads for the industry. These are people that know it and study it and are stakeholders. Dewey Decker is the head of the Deposit Coalition that got together with his fellow neighbors. He's a farmer, landowner that negotiated the deal with XTO Energy and brought the $110 million. And he says, you know what, when we get gas from Russia or some other place in the world, we really don't think about it. So, and think about what that does to the environment over there. They have no regulations over there, or what it does to the citizens, or what the rights of the citizens are there. So at least here, you know, we're bringing it in locally, and our citizens have rights, and we have some form of regulation. That's debatable, but I would agree that he's got a good point versus third world countries or other world countries. You know, we have an ability to self-govern our regulations here. You have Don Lockhart, who's featured in the story. Lockhart got lunch counter, and he said, you know what, I've worked hard, and I'm in it for the money, and there's nothing wrong with that, because he sells gas to the tankers and other things, and he has no apologies for it. I think he's a man of integrity, but as you get to know some of these characters throughout, he's not simply people with white hats and black hats in this. And Don, there's a vibrant conversation going on at his lunch counter all the time because people are always talking about it. And he welcomes that, you know. He doesn't mind getting in the middle of the conversation and telling you how he feels about it. Now, I'm going to back up. I'm going a little bit out of order because I want to talk a little bit about the context, and bear with me, of natural gas, because we've been talking about the lack of transparencies and issues. And obviously, when you have something like the Harper residence exploding and really nobody knowing about it, it's very disturbing. Now, we do have other explosions related to natural gas pipelines that we've seen, some of them very tragic. And so there's risks. And again, getting back to my perspective as a journalist, I think people can accept risks if they know about the risks. The industry likes to say, well, when you get in an airplane or you're driving the car, you might get killed. And that's true. But we have a pretty good idea of what we're doing, and we have some control over those risks. It's our option. We know that. I think the issue with the gas industry or these types of things is people have to understand what the risks are. Now, going back to the coal industry a little bit, because Pennsylvania, where permitting is going on, it has been just checking our time here. We're good for a little bit. I want to save time for questions. Pennsylvania has been a lot different from a cultural standpoint from New York State. And it has a long legacy of mineral extraction, and anthracite coal mining is part of that. Coal mining has, as we know through a lot of examples, maybe we don't know, but I've woken up to the ills of coal extraction and consumption. And there's the whole aspect of what we do when we burn coal to the environment. And that seems to be on everybody's radar screen now that we're talking about global warming and we're seeing the polar ice cap melt. But long before that, not as many people talk about ambient mercury pollution with coal, which is a real problem. Birth defects, there's actually some statistics about, and John Hanger likes to cite these, about the number of deaths and burst formations that you can actually quantify with coal burning that few people ever really talk about. But going back to the 50s and prior to that, there's more sensational problems with coal that might be more like Norma Fiorentino's well blowing up or the Bailey residence blowing up. And one was when they were mining underneath the Susquehanna River. And they ignored the regulators about going too close to the bed of the river. And it broke through, the river broke through into the coal mines, into the shafts, and flooded. This is what the, in Knox mine, this is what it looked like, and it killed 14 miners and wiped out all the coal mines, and it was a big environmental issue. This is the Drake oil field in western Pennsylvania where the petroleum industry was born. And you'll go, if you go to western Pennsylvania, you'll still see museums where they talk about the legacy of, we're a petroleum country now, the 20th century, all our comforts, our transportation, everything's built on carbon. And this is really where it all started. And this is what it used to look like. And we hear about this term about cumulative impact. What's the cumulative impact of shale gas? Well, this is getting back more into the time of Pulitzer. There was no regulations. It was pretty much a free-for-all. So I bring this up to say that all these things have a legacy to them, they have a history to them, and just trying to put it in perspective. Okay.
Can I ask you a question about all those wells next to each other?
Yes.
And so, putting them so close to each other, they're all functioning and able to draw up, more quickly?
Yeah,
Exhaust?
that's the late 19th century, but yes. They would just poke a hole down, and they didn't have the technology we have now. But here's what a gas well looks like now, okay? It doesn't look like that scene that we saw from the Drake oil field. What does it look like? Well, if you go down to Pennsylvania, you're going to see some well pads, you're going to see some flaring, you're going to see a lot of pipeline construction, and you're going to see also some areas that are relatively look okay. I mean, if you fly over it in an airplane, you're going to see it more. There's this concept of reclamation that the DEC talks about, and that was Linda Collard's point she made with her field of wildflowers, right? But there is some truth to that on the surface, that the land can be reclaimed, it can be seeded, it can grow back, it can be managed, the runoff can be managed. My question is, okay, we say that, what type of regulations do we have in place? And this is what this whole environmental review is looking at right now with the state of New York. What's really important is what's happening underneath the surface, and it's really hard to document that. How are things moving? Who has the burden of proof when a well goes wrong, when something goes wrong with a well? The flowback, where is that going? And this brings us back to this idea of, and I'm sorry for jumping around, I'm trying to...
The phrase flowback, does that mean the polluted water with chemical that comes with it?
Yes, flowback is, and let me just go back to the process real quickly, is that you put 5 to 10 million gallons of a chemical solution, we're not quite sure what it is, into the ground. We know it does have toxic chemicals in it, hydrochloric acids, biocides. Biocides are like chlorine that kill bugs and algae and growth. There's friction inhibitors. There's things used for machinery and they keep the scale off the machines, off well bores. Scale inhibitors they're called. So lots of different things, 400 or 500 different chemicals that they can use in one frac job. So Josh Fox's movie, if you've seen it, he goes into more detail and he focuses on that. So, okay, my feeling is these things are used for industrial production in a lot of different ways. But the industry has various exemptions, and I'm going to talk about that just in a minute. First, I want to go back to what's happening under the surface and how we're trying to learn more about that. There's, I think I'm going to talk about the exemptions first and then talk about the EPA investigation. So I'm going to have to skip around with the slides one more time, so bear with me. The Halliburton Loophole. Have people heard of that term before? Okay, the Halliburton Loophole is it's an industry exemption from the National Clean Drinking Water Act. And it was put into a 2005 energy bill. They didn't call it the Halliburton Loophole. It was Public Law 10958, okay. And this was crafted by the Bush-Cheney administration at a time when the shale gas industry was just really starting to discover the potential for shale gas in Texas. And it was prior to the development up here, but the fracking industry had found that they could break apart this bedrock, and it worked really well, and it was very productive. Now, as I said, fracking had been used for some time. It was never under federal jurisdiction. It was always up to the states. It was regulated by the states. But just to be sure that the feds would not get in here and start regulating what you put into the ground, they wrote and this was crafted by the Bush-Cheney administration. It was passed by that Congress, something that said, essentially, fracking does not have to comply to the regulations that other industries have to do when they have to report what they put into the ground or regulate what they put into the ground. Okay, so that's a big one. So these hazardous chemicals that if IBM put them into the ground or Kodak put them into the ground, some other industry, they'd have to write up all sorts of paperwork. They'd have to get certain types of approval if they did it, if they were allowed to do it at all. Okay, the fracking industry doesn't have to do that. Then they put it down into the ground, it fractures apart the bedrock, and then it flows back out. It's stimulation. And when it flows back out, the stuff that comes back out is the chemical solution, plus it's mixed with all this stuff that's deep down in the ground, various metals, some naturally occurring radioactive material, and brine. Brine, the industry likes to say, well, it's just salt, you have it on your table, but you know, if you put salt in a freshwater aquarium, you can see the consequences. And there was cases of salt pollution, it's called total dissolved solids. They're chlorides plus other things, and they can really raise hell with an eco. So all this stuff comes back out, and the industry can dispose of it using conventional means. There's the flowback, and then there's also other byproducts of the drilling process. So okay, we have an industrial waste here. It probably should be hazardous waste. It's not. It's just considered refuse. What does that mean? Again, my point isn't necessarily the fact that they're producing it, because there's a lot of industries that produce stuff, but it's how is it managed, how is it regulated, who knows what's even in it, and again, it's the transparency issue of that. So now we're going back to what happens under the surface and some of the investigations. So when shale gas became big and you had it, Josh Fox's movie came out, there was a lot more mainstream awareness of this, and some members of Congress in upstate New York, Maurice Hinchey specifically, was getting involved. And they said, we really need to know what the impact is here and what we're doing with the water table, both when we put stuff into the ground and also when we dispose of it. And there's some parts of the book which talks about some of the issues with streams, the fish kills, and other issues related to high chloride content in the rivers in Pennsylvania. The industry said, it's not us, it's the other industry, it's the coal industry, it's acid mines, it's this, that. And there is a lot of ambiguity about that. So in 2010, Congress funded the EPA to take another look at this Halliburton loophole. And they're not looking specifically at the regs, but what they are looking at is the impact that fracking has on groundwater. How do you know this? Okay, well, it's really an ambitious task. And there's a lot of independent research going on at various universities, but the EPA is trying to pull it all together and look at groundwater near fracking sites and see either through injection or through disposal or through what have you, whether there is an impact. And these are shots from Dimock, Pennsylvania, amid the controversy down there. They went to residents' homes. They did some testing. Now,
Are these reports now available?
no, they're not available. Well, there is. I'll answer that in a minute. And if we'll just hold off the questions for a few more minutes, and then we'll open it up, because I want to try to get through. This report from the raw data that came from some of the testing was made available, but with no context or no explanation. And it was widely reported by the mainstream media without really looking into it too much, is the Dimock water checks out. And what it's okay, there's no problem. And what the EPA actually found was there were some constituents, arsenic and methane and some other things in the groundwater, but it was okay because those places where there were high constituents, the homeowners had been instructed to put filters on their water. So in some cases, the industry provided those filters. So the EPA was saying, we need no further action. There's no crisis here where people are drinking polluted water. I think there was 7 of about 60 wells where they found high traces of this, that, or the other thing, arsenic and methane, some other metals. And they turned it over to the Centers for Disease Control, which has a bureau called the Agency for Toxic Substance Disease Registry. And they're starting to put together a report, which is not available yet, on whether consuming these types of things in the raw water could create a health impact. Now, this is just the very beginning, because this is a bigger question. I'm writing right now about some work being done up at Syracuse University. Duke University has done some work on looking at groundwater contamination near shale gas. Now, very complicated, because there's a couple things here. First of all, there's these natural occurring things in the ground that are not necessarily potable. The heavy metals that we talked about, there's bacteria, there's salt. And if you find these in the water table sometimes, not always, but when you start drilling holes through water tables, you have turbidity, right? That stirs up the water table. There's always a question about, was this related to gas drilling? What did it look like before gas drilling was here? Could they light their water on fire before? And the industry has a fallback by always saying, well, this stuff's in the ground. It happens. This stuff happens. So groundwater is dynamic. It changes. It's a complicated thing. Gas wells are itinerant. They're here one day. They're gone the next. So you have all these variables that really complicate the issue. So trying to get enough data over long term, over a large geographical area, to really understand the impact is a very, very ambitious task. Now, I won't spend too much time on this, but I want to just talk about the legal issues. And one is this idea of home rule. How many people have heard of home rule? A few. Okay, I'll explain it. We talked about the Halliburton loophole and the lack of regulation on a federal level. The states regulate gas, so it varies from state to state. In a lot of ways, that makes sense, because you have some states that have a very large resource of oil or gas or coal, or so it makes sense for the states to regulate those state by state. Now, in Pennsylvania and New York, local municipalities have not had jurisdiction over siting wells, right? So the state comes in and they regulate it. So what happened in New York was some of the municipalities that in areas in Dryden, which is up near Ithaca, and Middlefield, which is in the Catskills, said, wait a minute, we don't want shale gas here because it doesn't comply with our land use standards. And we are going to ban it. And the industry said, you can't ban it. We'll sue you if you do because it's right here in statute that the states regulate and not the local laws, local municipalities. So they took it to court. There's two cases, Cooperstown Holstein versus Middlefield and Dryden, Anschutz Exploration Corporation. And in PA, there's the Act 13, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But they took it to court. This was in the state Supreme Court, which is the lower court in New York. The lower court upheld municipal bans, saying, you know what, the local municipalities do, in fact, have a right to ban this. And it gets very complicated what the reasoning was, but essentially they said it was a constitutional right for the local municipalities to control their land use. Same thing in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was a little different because the legislature, the Pennsylvania legislature, tried to preempt home rule. They got out in front of it and said, we're not going to let, just to make sure the jump in here, we can't. And a group of towns got together, and this was part of a much larger bill. Towns challenged that. The local courts and the lower courts in Pennsylvania upheld the town ban. What's this mean? It means, well, if it's not regulated on a national level, local municipalities can still have a big impact because this idea that gas industries to develop a shale gas play needs large contiguous tracts. And if local municipalities can start opting out with bans, you know, it's much more difficult for the industry to lease up, build out, develop the infrastructure, and connect everything to tie everything together. So here's a rough map of what it's going to start to look like in New York if some of these bans hold up. And you can see that it really breaks up that earlier map I had of the drilling fairway, and it can discourage the industry from developing. Okay, covered a fair amount. We got a few minutes for a question. Do we have, 10 minutes left? So why don't we go ahead. Somebody that hasn't asked a question first, and then I will give everybody a chance. Yes, right here.
Like how important for the drilling is it for them to have like a big array of wells? And like what kind of scale do they need for horizontal fracking to make it like worthwhile for them?
Yeah, good question. It's hard for them to do here and there. I'll start with the pipeline. Okay, first of all, they need pipeline to get it to the market. And what they have in New York State is the Millennium Pipeline, which cuts across. I think I can show you here in one of these maps. And this is very important because the shale gas is especially valuable if it's close to big markets. There's the Millennium Pipeline right across the top of that. There's other pipelines that run that are not marked here. But the Millennium Pipeline carries it to the New York City area. So if you have shale gas here or there and there's no pipeline, it's called shut-in. It's essentially worthless. So it is an economy of scale with shale gas. You have, there's some conventional wisdom that says, geez, the small mom and pop independent operators can't really get into it because they don't have the capital to get the return. And to get the return, you have to do it on a large scale. I guess that's a good way, the best way to look at it. Yeah?
Given like how up in the air Cuomo is about a moratorium, would you say that municipal bans are like the strongest, best hope scenario?
Well, if you don't want to see natural gas move forward, then I would say municipal bans are your best, probably your best hope over the long haul, because I think sooner or later, and I could be wrong, I'm surprised all the time, that New York State and Cuomo is going to have to come up with some sort of regulatory scenario to allow shale gas rather than to ban it statewide. I just think there's going to be legal issues with that. Vermont has put on a ban, but it's not a practical matter in Vermont because there's not a large shale gas play underneath it. A lot of it has to do with the price of natural gas too, because the price of natural gas goes up, the assets underneath people's lands go up, there's a lot more money on the table, and there's a constitutional argument. If I'm a landowner and I have all these assets under my land, I have a constitutional right to develop those. And you can't say that, is the state getting between me and my mineral rights now? Okay, under what justification? I mean, there's always that balance, public health versus, rights of the landowner. And we live in a country where, freedoms are very highly valued. So that's a big question. But I think I would say that home rule looks, if you're against natural gas taking shape in New York, I would be paying very close attention to home rule because that's a big deal. Yeah, back here.
So going back to the exploding water well, so there had been gas seeping into that water well for some time. Was that polluting that water, assuming they drink from that?
Yeah, okay, good question. Methane supposedly is not considered toxic. There's some question about that, not a lot of study done on it. But you're not going to drink methane polluted water and necessarily drop over. So it looks terrible when it explodes. But it is a public health problem when things explode, okay? But it's not the toxicity of methane that is the main driver behind methane migration. Although there's more, there is, when it reaches a certain point, it can start, changing the chemistry of the air so it robs oxygen and other things. So it's not a healthy thing, but people can drink methane generally and be okay.
But it doesn't bring up any other chemicals?
Yeah, well, there's the other question. If methane's coming, what else is coming? And to get a little more technical, one of the things I'm writing about now is a Syracuse University study where they believe one of the hypotheses is this: it moves with the salts. So you have all this brine, which is deep down below the water, fresh water zone. When salts start moving up and around, that's a marker for other things as well. So you have these natural occurring things. We didn't talk a lot about the VOCs and the petroleum distillates and the other type, antifreeze, that type of stuff that gets injected into the well. That is also, these are the man-made chemicals versus the stuff the earth produces that can be markers.
Has it been known that biogenic methane can cause explosions, or is it just something that people are trying to look into now after explosions?
There is records of biogenic methane causing explosions. The stuff that I cite in the book, the DEP has determined was specifically related to gas drilling. But there's not a lot of records out there about what's biogenic, what's not. But it can, yes?
There's probably a lot of variation. I'm not sure well puts up, but people that are signing these 12.5% agreements, are they actually making a lot of profit on the wells on average? Or?
It depends, and it depends on the price of natural gas now. So one of the complaints is because there's a glut in the market, so much has been produced. We didn't talk much about that, but it's very important in terms of long-term viability. That the price of natural gas goes down, the royalties go down. But some people make a lot of money off their gas wells, especially when the price of natural gas in 2008 was about $11 per 1,000 cubic feet. Now it's about 3. So that just gives you a difference. So if the price of natural gas goes up or you have a lot of production, then you can make a lot of money. But that's a relatively small part of the population. Another big factor with this is you look at landowners, okay? Look at city dwellers. City dwellers don't necessarily own a lot of land. So you have a lot of the landowners is a small part of the population. Yeah, over here.
What about the links between fracking and earthquakes?
Great question, yeah. There's been a lot of discussion about that. There's been very little to, at least in the Northeast here, relate fracking activity with earthquakes. But what you have heard about, which are important, are these disposal wells. We talked about what do you do with the waste? Well, some gets recycled, whatever that means, because there's no statutory definition for it. Some of it goes through waste treatment plants. Some of it goes to Ohio in particular, where they have these old wells that are caverns. They've been depleted. They put the waste down into those wells. They're called injection wells, disposal wells. And that is where they've been having some earthquake issues in Ohio. Now, I've talked to some earth scientists that say seismic activity is low and it's not anything that's knocking over buildings or whatever, but when you have earthquakes related to injection wells, it tends to freak people out. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could just talk about the difference in the roles of the New York DEC hydrocarbon.
Yeah, their roles technically are very similar because they're state agencies that oversee the gas industry. And their cultures are kind of similar too because remember the rank and file Linda Collart in the DEC here that said, oh, no problem, we can do this. Well, her boss, Brad Field, is the head of the whole Mineral Resources Division. He's been around for a long time, and he's been pretty much, we can do this, we can definitely do this. DEP has been very much the same. The difference is the DEP, because of the political attitudes down there, now Governor Tom Corbett is very thumbs up with natural gas. So they're going ahead with it. And Krancer is their DEP chief now, is very conservative, doesn't want to talk about the problems, but, wants to talk about the benefits. And so pro-natural gas. DEC here, we still have Brad Field, but, we have this political hot potato that Cuomo, who's very much a hands-on control guy, he he's very ambivalent on it. So you have, the short answer to your question, though, is the DEC and the DEP essentially do the same functions, in each state, yeah.
Well, there's a correlation between like some sort of accident on the fracking site, and it hasn't been difficult in general to actually, determine fracking as a cause of an accident, like an explosion.
Well, whenever you have, it becomes a liability question for any company that has that. But I think the gas industry has more things going for it when it's trying to shield itself from liability.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of unknowns about it. There's not as much regulation. And you have now this whole idea of staffing, where you have relatively few staff members to oversee a lot of wells. So a lot of it's self-reporting. I don't know if we have time for another question, or maybe we should wrap it up.
We're actually out of time.
Okay.
People want to come up and ask.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.